Thank you, Portio-san. Portio-san, thank you very much. It is a pleasure to be here, and I'm really excited because we have so many people from different countries here, and so can I start by saying on behalf of the Australian government a very big welcome to everybody who has travelled here to be part of this very important conference. Now let me explain a little bit about what we're doing in Australia, about a recent inquiry we completed with our federal government, and then I'll give you some of my own points of view. So first and foremost, you would probably all know that we are in this bizarre situation in this country where we actually have enormous reserves of uranium. Probably the world's largest, we're the third largest exporter. Less than an hour from here, from this site, we have a nuclear reactor. Yet, Australia does not have nuclear energy. Now, in fact, in Australia, there is a moratorium on nuclear energy. In other words, we're not allowed to have nuclear energy. No minister has the authority, the power, to approve a nuclear power plant. Now, there's some inherent contradictions with every country. And there is a contradiction, I believe, when it comes to this moratorium on nuclear energy in Australia. Now, I'll come to those contradictions shortly, but let me explain what we did around about the middle of last year. So last year we had a federal election, and the Liberal National Party was elected here in Australia. We started a new term of government, and then the federal minister, whose name is Angus Taylor, referred to the committee that I chair, which looks at environment and energy issues, an inquiry, terms of reference, asking us really to look at the feasibility, the suitability, and the palatability of nuclear energy in Australia. So does nuclear energy stack up? Is it feasible on economic grounds, on technological grounds, on capability grounds? Is it suitable environmentally from safety and security perspectives, and is it palatable to the Australian people? So as we do with our parliamentary inquiries in Australia, we put the call out to people and say, if you have a point of view or an expertise in this field, please submit in writing your point of view, send it through to the Australian Parliament. And on my committee sits people from all different parts of the Parliament. It's not just my team, because we are in government, it's also the opposition, it's also the crossbench. We receive all of these submissions in, and then we travel the country. Some people come to our capital in Canberra and speak to us in Parliament House. Otherwise, we go out and we speak to people where they are. So we did that to make sure we are hearing as many voices as possible. Now, I won't go through all the evidence we found because most people in this room are already well informed about the issue, but you can just imagine. Right. After you receive all of the evidence, you basically get together as a committee and work out, well, what do we want to do? What do we wish to recommend to the Australian government? And what we recommended was three things. First, we recommended that nuclear energy should be a part of a future energy mix here in Australia. Secondly, that we should undertake a body of work in Australia to progress that possibility. And thirdly, we should have a partial and conditional lift of that moratorium to enable that to happen. Now, let me come back to some of these contradictions I believe that we have. Let me mention three really big, important ones, particularly for those of us in this room who are Australians. I'm a politician. So let me express this in political terms rather than in technical. All right? Freedom, democracy, the primacy of conscience. Three big, hairy ideas of the Australian political economy, which I believe are contradicted by our current stance when it comes to nuclear energy. Freedom. Australia is one of the most, if not the number one country in the world when it comes to success as a multicultural country. We have people from all walks of life, from every corner of the earth here in Australia. What binds us together, what unites Australians, is not religion, ethnicity. More than anything, it's a set of values. It's a common set of values. And there's one value which is more important than all other values that unite our country and Australia. That value is the value of freedom. Freedom of speech, association, freedom of enterprise. And yet, today, it is effectively illegal. We are not free to even consider the possibility of nuclear energy being part of our future energy mix. I do not stand here today suggesting nuclear is the answer for Australia, but I do suggest that consistent with the number one value that binds our country, the value upon which modern Australia was built, is being contradicted by virtue of us not even having the freedom to consider the possibility of nuclear energy. The second point I'd make is around democracy. We are a very successful liberal democracy here in Australia. And like any democracy, what is at the core of our system is the people, the sovereignty of the people, which means as we move forward on this debate about whether or not we have nuclear energy in Australia, we need to put the people at the centre. And a big lesson, probably the biggest lesson I learned through doing this inquiry on the prerequisites for nuclear energy, is the importance, democracy or not democracy, of trust, of that social licence. And I was very fortunate at the second half of last year to make visits not due to nuclear energy at all, but I made visits to Switzerland, to France, to India, to China, to Taiwan. And while in those markets, I spoke to people about nuclear energy. And the issue that loomed large for me was the importance of the social licence. Now, in Australia, as a democracy, that is particularly important because unless we can carry the Australian people with us in a mature, sensible conversation, then nuclear energy will not be given a fair go. And in the Australian vernacular, a fair go is all we ask for nuclear energy, to be fairly considered, to be on the table, to at least be assessed. The third point I mention is the primacy of conscience. Now, this gets a little bit philosophical, right? I believe that the most important thing each and every one of us has is our own conscience. It's what we believe. I was brought up as a Catholic, and I still practice as a Catholic, as a Christian. But as much as I might bow to the Pope, I bow to my conscience first. What we believe, what we truly believe, is the most primary thing, particularly in a country like Australia. Now, the reason I mention the primacy of conscience is I believe there's two big changes in the world that has made nuclear energy and the inquiry I've just run relevant. One is the advance in technology, and I look forward to hearing from some of the other speakers who really have demonstrable expertise in that field. Secondly, it's the issue of climate change. And this is where people's conscience have to be reached. If people truly believe in the need to try and decarbonise economies, if people truly believe that one of the greatest challenges of this generation and the generations to come is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, regardless of one's politics, left, right, in between or agnostic, regardless of one's potentially pseudo-religious beliefs on either side of the energy debate, if hand on heart one truly believes that we have to reduce emissions, then how can you in good conscience not at least consider this zero emissions baseload technology? Doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense. And so a part of also moving forward with this debate in Australia, as best as we can, we need to try to depoliticise it. Because one of the problems I believe globally we have in the climate change and energy debate is a binary prism. It's either or mentality. You either believe or you don't believe. You're either pro-coal or you're pro-renewables. It's overly simplistic to communicate in binary terms, and it does the world no good. In order for us to carry this debate forward, we can't risk the possibility that it gets overly politicised, that people then are forced to run into their individual corners, because once we do that, and as politicians, we're prone to it, you force people to their corners and they're only going to come out swinging. And we are not going to solve some of these enormous challenges of the world through a bloodbath of people coming out from their corners. It has to be something where people actually agree. Now, it doesn't mean we all hold hands and we sing happy songs. The real world doesn't act like that. But I have found since doing this inquiry into nuclear energy that nuclear energy has, ironically, the capacity to unite people. I say ironically because traditionally, if you go back 20, 30 years ago, it would have been fair to say, oh, well, look, you know, those on the left don't like nuclear, those on the right, some of them like nuclear. But because of those changes in technology and climate change, you actually now do see the left and the right actually coming together, where you don't have that spectrum just as a solid bar, but actually a rubber bar, and you almost have the left and the right come together if they're prepared to consider their conscience and the importance of what they believe in, which is leveraging one of the greatest technologies the world has ever seen to meet some of the challenges we have today. Challenges which includes, of course, keeping the cost of electricity down, keeping the reliability strong, and driving emissions down over time, playing a role in decarbonising the economy. Now again, the committee I chair, the government of which I'm part, and even I myself as an individual, I'm not saying for a moment that nuclear energy is the silver bullet solution, but it should at least be considered. These comments don't come with any disrespect to other important sources of energy, renewables included. But this can't be a binary debate. If you love renewables, You know, renewables need partners in life. They can't be lonely. They're intermittent sources of energy. They rely on the God gift of wind and sun. They need to be firmed up. The question is nuclear energy one of those sources of energy that should be used in the Australian context to do that? And my view is it should at least be fairly considered, and therefore the moratorium should be partially lifted for generation 3+ and 4, and it should be a conditional lifting where you only have a power plant on the prior informed consent of the local communities who will be impacted. So with that, thank you very much for having me. Up here,